Washington. I'm just spitballing here on the Jim Acosta Show. As you can see on the screen there, Molly John Fast, Rick Wilson are both with me. Guys, it is great to see. We made it happen. The Eagle has landed.
We did.
That's right.
We made it happen, Captain.
It's great to talk to
It's all
both
a
of you.
hot new thing, man. Those hearts are exploding like a volcano.
I think it's important to note here that we are all actually friends.
We are all actually
yes.
These are people I talk to on the phone, though not that often. But sometimes, yes.
No, and we wish we could do this more often. I'm going to try to, as much as I can, cajole both of you into doing this as often as possible.
Yes, please.
We're trusting the Substack machine to be able to do this with all three of us on camera. And
hey, it's working. It's working like butter right now.
It is. The hearts are going up Rick Wilson's nose. Like, well, I don't want to make a comparison here.
Like cocaine.
Yeah.
That's right. No,
why don't we can just say that?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
It's social media cocaine. But
that's right.
I'm starting this show basically the way I've started just about every show since beginning this new adventure. And that is asking the question, what the Musk? And I know where I'm going with this, but in a new filing in court, I kind of do this thing where I give folks the news and then we talk about it. The Trump administration said in a court filing that Elon Musk is not the administrator in charge of Doge. I'm sure you've seen this. He's a senior advisor to the president per this declaration. So, okay, that begs the question, who is minding the store? What the hell is going on? Who is in charge here? We don't seem to know. That's why I ask, is today co-president's day or shadow president day? Because I guess that would make Elon Musk sort of like the George Washington of shadow presidents. I mean, what?
I just want to point out that this will make Elon would have the same title as Anita Dunn. You'll remember Anita Dunn as the person who went to different parts of the government and told them to let her and her teenage hackers into different elements of the federal government.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, Rick, I was under the impression for weeks that Elon Musk was running the show, that he was directing these 20-year-old kids to go into various departments and agencies and vacuum up data at the Treasury Department until they were blocked, and over at the Social Security Administration, which has apparently resulted in a top-level official there saying, I'm not doing this, I'm not going along with this.
Right.
But the White House is trying to make the case that, oh, no, he's not in charge. He's not really in charge. He's sort of in charge, but he's not in charge.
I have a theory of the case here, Jim.
Yeah.
Look, Elon Musk and Donald Trump have decided to split the presidency. Elon is head of government, like a prime minister would be, and Trump is head of state, like a king would be.
Right.
But I think what's happening here, I interpret this as a little differently. I think this is Susie Wiles making her play to take Elon out. And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
By saying he's not a government employee, and by saying he's not running Doge, there's a much lower degree to which he should have access to any of this confidential and classified information. And I think this may be Susie Wiles being clever and boxing Elon in a little bit on his role, because Elon has had enormous powers in the government so far. He has had the ability of life and death over government programs.
Yeah.
He's had full access to any kind of information anywhere he wants it. And so I suspect that might be what's happening here. But if it's not, it's a mistake on the part of the White House and their legal people to put Elon out in the wind now. Now these states attorneys generals are going to say, who's this rando nobody that you don't know that isn't running anything? What's he doing going through my Social Security records? And these state attorney generals, I think, are going to give Elon a very hearty wake-up call.
Yeah, and Rick, go ahead, Molly.
I just want to add that, like, the state attorneys generals, I've interviewed a bunch of them, and they were, I interviewed the one from New Mexico in July, and he was saying that, they were ready, that they had just been spending all their time focusing on the lawsuits that they would bring. So I think that's a good point that Rick has, if that is how it ends up.
And Rick, I mean, the question I wanted to ask you, because you were a well-known Republican strategist for many years, I thought this was the sort of thing that would irritate the living hell out of any tried and true conservative. This idea that your data with the government could be susceptible to being, vacuumed up by various nefarious folks inside the government. all run by a tech billionaire. I mean, that just sounds like something that would make the National Review explode on your coffee table.
I can remember back in the day of Obamacare, Republicans were saying, "Do you want Barack Obama and George Soros to have access to your medical records?"
Yeah.
And it led to Republicans losing their minds over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And now it's like, yes, please, Daddy, spank me harder. I mean, they don't care about the things they cared about at one point.
Yeah.
And this idea that they're going to take away your ability to protect the confidentiality of your social security records, your tax records. I mean, Elon's people are trying to get into the IRS as we speak to take
Yeah.
control of the IRS database that controls audits, collections,
Right.
and tax status of every taxpayer. They want into that.
Yeah.
I can't wait for the delighted cries on Wall Street when Elon Musk calls for a round of funding for something and says, "Hey, I know you're actually worth this amount,"
Yeah.
or
Right.
calls a member of Congress and says, "How did you get to be worth $20 million, Congressman? I'm going through your
Yeah.
tax filings
Right.
right now."
Well,
Right.
and the irony of that is that Donald Trump has not paid his fair share in taxes for years. He has claimed so many times that he's under audit and so on.
Right.
And now we're going to have Elon Musk, getting your IRS information. I mean, you just can't. It's just boggles the mind,
You
Bob.
can't make it
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
You
Well,
can't
and
make it up.
yeah, and I mean, I would also add, like, Donald Trump's the first president not to release his tax returns in modern
Yeah.
presidential history. I mean, and it's sort of, I think what's interesting is they keep saying, that this is about transparency when clearly it is not about transparency.
Yeah.
That this is
Right.
about democracy when it's clearly not about democracy. That this is about, that all of the sort of words they use have taken on almost no meaning at this point.
Yeah.
They're just sort of using these projections, these vague tropes.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys saw this, but apparently Steve Bannon, the former chief White House strategist, said something in an interview with a British podcaster that Elon Musk is a quote parasitic illegal immigrant. He made
Yeah.
this comment. He made this comment to a British news site called Unheard, and he said this. He said, "quote Musk is a parasitic illegal immigrant. He wants to impose his freak experiments and play act as
Yes.
God without any respect for the country's history, values, or traditions." I fell down the rabbit hole, Rick and Molly. How is
Jim,
Steve Bannon
there
channeling what I'm thinking?
there aren't many days where you and Molly and I could all go, Steve Bannon has a point there, but he has a
Yeah.
point. I mean,
See,
he's
Is
not
this like this
wrong
when the spectrum
about
bends around and
right. The horseshoe has met, right? But he's
yeah.
not wrong that this is a really dark moment brought to us by a guy who came into this country allegedly on an education visa, maybe legally, maybe not, maybe with some
Yeah.
emeralds shoved up his backside for his dad, maybe not. Nobody
Musk has
knows the
denied
truth of
this.
the
Yeah,
Right.
story.
I think the point.
And it's just so murky. And he is a guy who is the welfare queen of all welfare queens.
yeah,
Right. I mean, I think, look, Elon got here from government subsidies for climate change, right? That's how he got
Right.
here. Electric cars have government subsidies.
right.
But I would add, Bannon, and look, a lot of stuff Bannon says, and I do not agree
No,
with by
exactly.
any
Yeah,
stretch of the imagination. But Bannon is a populist, and Bannon
Right.
sees that a lot of these policies, right? I mean, look, Elon is about to try to take a sledgehammer to Social Security and Medicare, and
yeah,
and I think Bannon understands that those are Trump voters that he is punishing.
yeah.
And if Republicans want to win elections, taking away entitlements, which wildly unpopular, is going to
Right.
be a real problem for them.
Yeah.
Jim, I think Bannon made a point the other day. He said, a lot of our voters are on Medicaid. A lot
Yes.
of our voters are on Medicare. A lot of their voters are also
Right.
on Social Security, disability,
Right.
SNAP,
Right.
TANF. A lot of them
Right.
receive farm income from
Right.
USAID programs that no longer exist.
Right.
The farmers in Wisconsin who voted for Trump, 90-10, learned this week, dairy farmers, that USAID were the people that were buying a ton of their cheese every year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
they're stuck with millions of tons of cheese because it's not going to go overseas now. all the
Yeah.
finding out is going on across the board.
And speaking of
Yeah.
that finding out, I mean, I do want to pass this along to folks and get you guys to weigh in. The Washington Post reporting that many federal government employees dismissed over the weekend were chatting and texting with one another. They dubbed the error-ridden run of firings, this is according to the Washington Post, as the St. Valentine's Day
Yes.
Massacre.
Yeah.
This according to the Washington Post, the Federal Aviation Administration let go of hundreds of technicians and
Yep.
engineers just weeks after a
Yeah.
midair collision a few miles from the White House killed 67 people. This is also according to the Washington Post. FEMA, which handles the nation's natural disasters, is preparing
Yeah.
to fire hundreds of probationary employees, according to
Yep.
4 people familiar with the situation. I mean, this is with the agency already stretched thin after the wildfires in California and the floods in Kentucky. And the
Yeah.
list goes on and on and on. The CDC, the NIH,
CDC.
the
Yep.
National Science Foundation, apparently today. But to me, the one that typifies it the most is the Federal Aviation Administration, guys.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
what they're doing at the FAA as these incidents have been happening. I mean, it just
It's
boggles.
insane.
It's
But it
scary.
should
It's
but
scary.
the one thing I would say why it shouldn't boggle the mind is because this was everything they talked about in Project 2025,
That's
right?
true. Yep.
This was the idea of dismantling the federal government, getting rid of NOAA, right? Getting rid of
Right.
weather services, privatizing everything that can be privatized. Look, this is like the wholesale stripping of the American government. What I think is the most ironic and the thing that really sticks in my brain is here's the richest man in the world who is doing this.
Right.
So like
Yeah.
think of the Carnegies. I mean, this is like reverse philanthropy to the worst way. By the way, yeah, just speaking of the nukes for 1 second.
The nukes. Yeah, you saw that
For
comment. Yep.
10 hours this weekend, they had fired the people who were in charge of the nukes. I guess they rehired some of them. But imagine the like level of care that is going into this. Zero, right?
None.
Like
None.
literally zero.
Yeah.
I
And go ahead, Rick.
No, I'm sorry. I spoke to someone at a federal agency yesterday who told me that when the Doge people came in, they did the whole like, "What is your job?" pregame questionnaire. They couldn't understand what the people were doing, so they just said, "We'll take every third person on the list."
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean,
Yeah.
it is so random and so sloppy, and yeah, you know what? You might want to cut government spending, but the people that keep our nuclear weapons from getting it either A, the wrong hands, or B, going off accidentally, I think we keep those people on board. Just call me crazy, but
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
I think that might be a good call. But I also think, I mean, one of the things I'm just reading this chat, and I just want to say is that the women, we're seeing run for something. I know you guys know her. She was
Yeah.
talking about how so many of these federal employees who are getting fired are going to run for office. So the
That's
good
right.
news is
good
that
for
these
them.
people know that they are important to how the federal government runs, and that we have not seen the last of a lot of these people.
Well, and you remember Trump's raking the forest. What about ravaging the Forest Service? NBC. I mean, it just
Fired thousands of Forest Service employees this
that's
week.
right. And this is according to NBC News. A freeze on the hiring and onboarding of thousands of federal firefighters could have deadly consequences as the national wildfire response operates as a or at a diminished capacity. This is according to a federal firefighting captain who spoke with NBC News. I mean, guys, this is going to give folks, I think, an appreciation for what the federal government does in so many different ways. And one of
Mhm.
the things that I've been thinking about is we're worried about the economy and how, Trump was talking about during the campaign, no taxes on tips and so on. There are so many federal workers. They're not just here in Washington, D.C. They're in
Right.
all of these far-flung places from here to
Mhm.
Timbuktu. And you talk about waiters and waitresses, bartenders, baristas, people who work in hotels. All of those kinds of jobs are going to be affected if you have thousands, hundreds of thousands of federal workers laid off, not going on government trips, not doing the work that they do, worried about the kind of money that they're spending.
I think that's so right, Jim.
Yeah.
And look, this idea is like Doge says they've saved $100 billion already, but they won't specify what it is, and they don't
No.
have any
Right.
justifications for the cost to America. Look, I could say I saved $5,000 this month because I didn't pay my mortgage. Well,
Right.
that has bad consequences. So these people aren't paying for things that the country, that our taxpayers have decided, and through Congress we have decided that we are going to invest in as a country. And so
There's
the danger
yeah.
of that is that they just don't know what they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And there are, look, with Project 2025, which is the template for this, there were intended consequences, right? Like getting rid
Sure.
of the Department of Education. But
Yep.
then there are unintended consequences. Like if you look at the first of Trump's admins. That ended, right? How did that end? That ended with a pandemic. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, that was not the pandemic was not his fault, but the inability to handle it and the million, probably more people died because of it.
Hmm.
That kind of thing. So I do think we're going to see unintended consequences, and it feels like we're hurtling towards something right now. Just sort of
Hmm.
willy nilly cutting the federal
Hmm.
government never seems like a good plan.
Now, Rick, I'm so glad that you're here because I know you did all that work with the Lincoln Project. You guys were very instrumental in 2020. Donald Trump won in 2024. What is the answer? How should folks respond to this? How should Democrats respond to this? How should Republicans who are sick and tired of Trump and have been and tired of Trump for 8 years, 10 years, whatever it is? I mean, I talked to James Carville the other day. He was saying, no, folks, to just sit back, let Trump fall on his face. I'm a little worried about what happens between now and then.
Right.
What's your sense of it, Rick?
Well, look, I think in terms of communication about what Trump is doing, you can't just sit back and let it play. You have to constantly keep up a line of pressure on Trump and his allies. You have to keep seeking to divide Trump and Musk, Trump and Wiles, Trump and Miller,
Yeah.
all the people that are inside that world. It is like a bunch of rabid cats in a bag full of meat, and they're all fighting each other for power and
Yeah.
position. So the more you divide them,
But,
the more you wedge them, the harder it is for Trump to execute on some of the worst of these ideas.
and you
You've got
and
to
you
do
also need to
the legal
narrate it.
side. Yeah, you've got to do the legal side, and when you combine the legal, the messaging, and the political,
Yeah.
you end up with something that can be a countervailing strategy. I don't think that it works to have the geriatric rapid response team from the House going out every day with a 5 paragraph press release. I think it needs to be on social. I think it needs to be
Right.
faster, lighter, funnier, younger, sharper, edgier. And I
Yeah.
think all these messages have to not only talk to the Democratic base, it needs to talk to Republicans now. And we at Lincoln, we never wanted to talk to the MAGA group because we're like, they're not movable. But now
Yep.
he's moving them for us. He's hurting them. So the message from Democrats and from center right movement people and from pro democracy people needs to be over and over again. They are hurting you. You are
Right.
the sucker in the deal. Trump
Yeah.
is doing things that are going to hurt your life, your career, your stability,
Yeah.
your money, your family.
Well, and I wrote a Substack about this the other day, and I started with America, you've been had because
Right.
Trump. I mean,
Yeah,
and
100%.
I mean, this just in, Trump out on the campaign trail said on day one we're going to start lowering
Mhm.
prices. Has not happened. On day one,
Right.
he said we're going to end the war in Ukraine. That has not
Right.
happened. I'm talking to Mark Hertling in a little bit on the program, but I mean, time and again, and we all know. I mean, this is the guy who said that Haitian immigrants are eating cats and dogs. We know he's full of shit a lot.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there was a messaging problem during that campaign, and it
Right.
seems as though that is in the process of being corrected.
So I want to talk about the messaging thing because I
Yeah,
think this is a real issue.
yeah,
Part of the problem is that Democrats, and this is, I think, a problem with consultants, the consultant class has made Democrats afraid of their own shadows.
yeah.
And so
Yes.
they are
That's
terrified of
true.
fucking up. So you have Democrats who are so passive and don't necessarily volunteer, they sort of run from interviews. And then you have people like Trump who's on everything all the time and it doesn't matter. And like what you saw with Biden world, and I would say this to them again and again and again,
Yeah,
because Biden had a lot of good policy, very popular, but because they refused, and they did this thing where they were aggressively boring for the first 2 years,
yeah,
and nobody would cover them, and they'd be like, "Ha ha, we got you." Yeah, well, here's what happened. Donald Trump ran for president for 4 fucking years, and Democrats disappeared. They didn't even know Biden was president, and
yeah,
and it turns out you can't do that. And even like the day, you remember those Google searches the day of the election where people were like, is Joe Biden still on the ticket? You can't do that. And I keep
yeah,
No.
saying to them, it doesn't matter. If
yeah,
you're not out there 24/7, no one gives a fuck. It'll just,
yeah.
they will drown you out. And
They
this
will
is the
flood the
problem.
zone and you will
Right.
drown.
And
Right.
then
And
I yeah, no, and I've talked
this is
to
the problem. with our governor right now. So I live in New York, and
Yep.
we have a governor who is very polite
Yeah. What's
and
going on?
who does not do interviews and who is not a very good orator. And she's fine. She's certainly fine. But the reality is she's setting it up for the Republican to eat her lunch.
Yeah.
And, we have this big problem with the mayor. The mayor is clearly, if anyone watched that
Unreal.
Fox and Friends interview where they
Insane.
does
Yeah.
anyone want to talk about the Fox and Friends
as I,
interview?
as I like to say, saying the riot part out loud. I mean, this was, for folks who need to be caught up to speed. A lot of our folks are engaged and very informed, but basically, Tom Homan, the border czar for Donald Trump, was on Fox and Friends, essentially saying to Eric
Yeah.
Adams, who was there sitting with him on Fox and Friends, "I'm going to be
Right.
quote up your butt" or something like along those lines.
Mhm.
It was
Yeah.
vulgar along those lines. And
Yep.
if you don't help us with this, I guess it's a quid pro quo. We're
Mhm.
going to get you
Yes.
off the hook with this corruption,
Yes.
alleged
Yep.
corruption stuff, in exchange
Yep.
for helping us rounding up migrants in New York City.
Yeah.
The home of the Statue of Liberty. It was repugnant to
It
watch,
was
absolutely disgusting.
shocking.
Insane.
Shocking. Yeah.
Insane.
You guys should look it up. Shocking.
Yeah,
And at the end, it became clear. Anyone who watched that knew that Holman was saying, "We have stuff on you, and you're going to do what we want."
yeah,
And so now we have a moment where our governor has an opportunity to do the right thing and to take a risk. And I don't know that she will, but I certainly hope that she does. And I think that, again, one of the things Democrats can learn from Trump, and again, nobody is a fan of Trump's here, but they can be strong and
yeah,
they can project strength and they can do things and not worry.
yeah. And go ahead, Rick.
Democrats need to learn the power of assertion. Say
Yeah.
what something is. Say what something must do. Say that Eric Adams must resign.
Yeah.
And Governor Hochul does not want to do this because, as Molly
Yep.
said, she's fine, but she's not confrontational and doesn't
Right.
and doesn't want to upset this like careful Jenga tower of various people in New York who have
Right.
political ambitions or what have you. But Eric Adams is now a Trump person, a MAGA person. He is in
Yeah,
bed with the devil. Take
Yes.
him out.
Yeah.
yeah,
Four of his
I'm
deputy mayors resigned, which
today.
having
Yeah.
worked in the mayor's office as a senior advisor to Giuliani back in the dawn of time, if four deputy mayors walked out the door back then, it would have been a nuclear explosion. Nothing else would have been covered in New York for weeks on end.
that's right.
Yeah.
This is a
Yeah,
guy who is corrupt, and now he's made a corrupt deal with a corrupt administration. Kathy Hochul could do America a great service by removing him. That
Hmm.
takes away something of power that Trump has. It's
Right.
insane that they
And
wouldn't do it.
And also the other thing is, even if she doesn't remove him, which I think she should be every day out there like, "This guy should resign. You should watch the Fox and Friends." All of this
yep,
like
Right.
clarity,
That's
no
right.
mealy mouth stuff, just like he should
Straight to
resign.
the
It's
point.
clear. This is what's going on. America. New York City deserves a real mayor who isn't in the tank for Trump.
yeah. And New Yorkers want toughness. They don't want this. Well, let me stick my finger in the wind and figure this out, and I'll get back to you in a week. But the thing that really riles me up and pisses me off more than anything about this, and it gets back to a larger issue, and that is, the Justice Department going after FBI agents if you worked on the
Right.
January 6th case, or Justice Department
Insane.
officials going after prosecutors if you were involved in the Donald Trump criminal prosecutions. That is not America. And I've
Mm.
said it
No.
before, and I will say it again. That is not the American way of life. And if we are going to abandon the idea and the principle of equal justice under the law, that nobody is above the law, there is a slippery slope that we may go down that we're not going to be able to
You're
recover
right.
from. And that is
Mhm.
the thing that
Yes.
scares me. And letting Eric Adams off the hook because he's going to help out with ICE and Dr. Phil's going to be out there and all of this
Right.
other shit. That's not America, for Christ's sake. And I wish people
It
would
is. It's
wake the F
giving
up.
third world kleptocracy
Yeah.
vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it
It-
is also important to mention that the FBI, known liberals at the FBI, all
Oh yes,
Republicans, yes,
all
no,
those
uh,
Soros deep staters.
right? I mean, if can you imagine
yeah.
if like if George Soros did a 15th of what Elon Musk does on a
Or
daily basis?
Obama and Eric Holder, for example. I mean, my God, it would be pitchfork and torch time in
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. Rick,
Yes.
where are the Republicans in the House and in the Senate?
In the House, they are basically now, because of redistricting in the states over the last 10 years, they're all insane. Every district in the country, with a handful of maybe 8 or 9 districts, they are so MAGA that it doesn't matter. They're going to be all Trump, all in, or worse than Trump, which is actually a slight advantage. But in the Senate, they are convinced that they're saving their tough votes for later, which I don't know if you can vote for RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, Pete Hegseth, and the rest of this clown car of lunatics. When is your tough vote going to happen? Molly and I were on a stage with Karl Rove last week, or week before last, I guess, and
Who
he was
even
like, "Well,
knows?
they're saving their votes for later when it counts." I'm like, "When?"
Yeah.
The ones that are up for reelection are all afraid of a MAGA primary, and unfortunately for all of them, they're never going to cast a tough vote. They're always going to
So
be ready. Maybe they'll cast a tough vote if it
so
happens after their state filing deadline.
right.
But
So the good news
they're all
is
compromised.
there are 2 Senate seats to pick up here, and I think that that should be the top line, uh, which is
Yep.
Collins in Maine. She may not even be running again. We've talked about this again. She
Yeah.
talked about this before. She hasn't raised a ton of money. Susan Collins in Maine, and then also in North Carolina.
Yep.
And I think that it's worth talking about this for a minute because that North Carolina seat, while North Carolina is a sort of swingy state, if this is the same kind of midterm as it was in 2018 when Democrats were able to really deliver and perform, and you
Right.
can run against an Elon Musk. And that's why I think, like, and again, I like Carville, he's my buddy, but it's
Yeah.
worth remembering, like, there is no mainstream media, right? It is dead. And I take no pleasure to say this because I personally am a part of it. But so Democrats are going to have to narrate what's going on.
Yeah.
And otherwise, people will not know, right? Otherwise, Elon will say, I mean, we saw this today with Sean Duffy. Sean Duffy blaming Mayor Pete for the plane crashes that happened under his watch. So
Yeah.
Democrats have like 2 jobs. One is to keep democracy, protect norms and institutions. And the other is to narrate what's happening in a way that's clear and concise. And we've talked about
Yeah.
this a lot. So those are 2 pickup opportunities. I also think there are other seats. I mean, but it's a tough map. It's not a great Senate map for Democrats.
And you already have some Senate Democrats announcing that they may not run for reelection, correct? You have
Gary
Gary
Peters.
Peters,
Yeah.
yeah, and Tina
But
Smith, I
that's
believe, in
good.
Minnesota as well.
Tina Smith. But Gary Peters, and I say this with all the love in the world for Gary Peters, the people that will run for that seat are much more
Are
exciting
much
than
more
Gary
effective.
Peters.
Yep.
Yeah.
Could you get a Pete
Yeah.
Buttigieg?
Good
Could you
guy,
get a
good
Molly
guy, good
McGorry?
guy. But yeah, the
Yeah.
good
If you
guy.
could
But
get
there
a
are a lot
Mayor
of good
Pete.
communicators getting into that race.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Tina Smith is Minnesota, and that though there's a real open question about whether or not we see, the Governor Tim Walz runs, whether we
Ah,
see. I
right.
mean, there's a lot of good
But
people running in that
and
seat too.
they're also trying to get the right is trying to get Ilhan Omar to run.
Right.
Yeah, well,
Right.
but
Good luck with that. Yeah. But
that's the dream.
and the damnedest thing, Rick, you were talking about these votes for people like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. and so on. And where are we in the universe when Mitch McConnell is sort of becoming like the John McCain? Again, I'm not going to make an equal comparison there.
Right.
That would be unfair.
Well, not
But
yet,
but
anyway.
McConnell is kind of emerging as the guy who might be a bit of a maverick from time to time. And as somebody's saying right now, too late, Mitch. I 100% agree with you. There's a
Listen,
whole what's past is prologue for sure.
yeah, no forgiveness for Mitch for taking the advice of a guy named Josh Holmes, who runs a podcast now, but was Mitch's senior advisor, who just before the Senate trial on Trump's second impeachment for launching a terrorist attack on the Capitol, said, well, we need to keep Trump happy so we can keep a permanent governing coalition of working class voters. And McConnell took the bait and told his people, don't do it.
Yeah.
McConnell could have easily rallied the Senate to impeach Trump, and we would not be where we are right now. So, not forgiving
Right.
that.
He would have bought
Right.
10
And he
I
votes.
will
also
say this:
he did
that
steal a Supreme Court seat from Barack Obama. So
Well, there's that. I mean, look,
yeah,
woulda, coulda, shoulda. But
right,
I will say this: McConnell is one of the few people left who really did believe in the rules based international order, who
Yeah.
really did believe in, and as much as he is a hardball
Ukraine.
political player,
Yeah.
and Harry Reid one time told me that there were three masters of the Senate in our lifetimes. Harry Reid was one of them, Lyndon Johnson was one of them, and Mitch McConnell was one of them. He said Mitch could do more in the minority than we could do in the majority. He understands how the institution works. I wish he had more gumption
Yeah.
before this. I will take him being a bit of a disruptor right now. I'll take what I can get, because otherwise we're going to have the Senate roll over for Trump every single time, and at some point, the if we can engender a fight between the Thune faction, which is the
right,
plural, I'll call it a plurality of the Republicans, versus the crazier Trump faction, which is only 9 or 10 people.
Yeah.
yeah,
Rick Scott, Cindy Smith, Tommy Tuberville, the weirdos. Um, I think that there's a world where Mitch can become semi a center of gravity in that. I did recommend in an article last week on Substack. I said the funniest thing ever would be if McConnell, Murkowski, and Collins all caucus as independents. They would gain all that power that Joe
right.
Manchin used to have by being votes that you had to go and lobby and work.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah, I
never going to
mean,
happen.
two
Never going to
things
happen.
about McConnell I think are important. One is he is very rich. Two is he is very old, and he's probably not running again. Now,
Yeah.
do I think McConnell has a moral compass? No, certainly not. He cares about power. But is he
Mhm.
how we got here? Absolutely.
Sure.
Right? This is how we got here, Mitch McConnell. So I do think, look, he there was there were reporting, and there was a theory of the case that Hegseth was not going to get through, and it was Tillis who was this wavering vote and then went and voted. There's a really good piece
Yep.
in the Washington Post about how he changed his mind at the last minute. Who knows why? Who
Yeah.
knows? but
Yeah.
um
I know
but
I know why. Elon Musk called him and said, "I'm going to spend $100 million in a primary
but
Yeah.
against you if you don't
right,
do what I
He's the
want."
new Bannon.
and
He's the new Bannon,
right,
basically.
and
Yeah, but with
Tillis
real money.
But
was
with
real
real
money.
money. Yeah. Right.
But Tillis
Doesn't
is
wear
a
blue
real
shirts.
pickup opportunity that Democrats should not sleep on, right? I mean,
100%. Don't
if
sleep on North
anything,
Carolina.
yeah, North
Yeah,
Carolina.
I agree. Well,
Yeah.
guys, I hope we can do this over and over and over again. And
Delighted.
we don't even have to get on Substack. We could just call each other and
That's right. We can talk on the
Yeah, but you
phone.
know what? I
yeah.
I, I kind of like the hearts. I kind of
I
dig the
like the
I
hearts.
like
hearts.
the hearts.
They
And
all want
somebody
Rick's
said I look
nose.
much younger here than I do on television. So I'll take it, man. I'll
You guys
take
have
it.
gotten tons of compliments here, and
Yes.
I think we should make this a regular thing, so long as I'm not annoying the
Abs-
hell out of you. But both of you,
no, we
thank
Let's
you.
love you
make it
guys.
happen, Captain. Love
Yes.
it.
Long
All
overdue,
right.
guys. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Bye. Thanks.
Congratulations on everything. This is
Thanks.
amazing.
Thanks.
Thanks for the opportunity today, Jim.
All right,
And
you
Molly, I'll
guys.
talk to you later.
All right.
Okay.
Love
Bye.
both of you
Bye.
guys.
See you
Thanks a
guys.
lot. Really appreciate it. Great stuff. Rick Wilson, Molly Jong Fast. I mean, it doesn't get better than that in terms of a combo. They were just absolutely fantastic. I'm going to try to get General Mark Hertling into the conversation right now, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He and I have had so many great conversations over the years, and he is just such a wonderful resource in all of this. I'm going to talk to him in just a moment, and let's get him up and running because there's a lot to talk about, especially when it comes to what is happening in Ukraine right now. That is, uh, you know, we're starting to see uh, President Zelensky of Ukraine basically say, "I don't like being cut out of the conversation, guys." He was making some statements about that to that extent today. I'm bringing Mark Hertling into the conversation right now. And just FYI, everybody, this was in the Washington Post earlier today. The Trump administration concluded initial talks with Russia over the war in Ukraine on Tuesday. That's today, of course, turning point in Washington's handling of Europe's most destructive conflict in decades. There's General Hertling right there. General, we're going to turn if we could turn the phone that away. There we go. Perfect. You're looking good. Great to see you as always. And great to have you on this program. Thanks for doing this.
Hey, Jim, I was just listening to you and Rick and Molly Jong, and I think I'm into this Substack thing now. It was kind of fascinating to hear the three of you going wild. I'll
Yeah.
try and calm things down a little bit, although you'll
No.
probably get me fired up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And whatever you can do, we're happy to have it. Just be you. I mean, I've just so enjoyed our conversations over the years, Mark, because you tell it like it is, and that's what I like about it. And I'm concerned about what is taking place, what did take place in Riyadh over the last 24 hours. We had the Americans and the Russians, and it is important for us to. I mean, Reagan talked to Gorbachev, no question about it. Obviously, the U.S. has to talk to the Russians, but the Americans and the Russians sitting at the bargaining table without the Ukrainians there trying to work out the future of Ukraine, it just feels like this is going in a bad direction. And I have to think, and we saw this earlier today from Zelensky, the Ukrainians are getting pretty upset about this.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And so are the Europeans, Jim. I
Yeah,
mean, they're trying to do some contingency planning to work around it. But truthfully, I mean, it's a bad look, not just for the negotiations, but it's a bad look for the United States. We shouldn't do things like this.
right.
You're talking about dealing with a guy who is obviously a war criminal, and that's Putin, as well as some of his minions like Lavrov, who was sitting at the table, who is known by everybody in Europe to not only be a key diplomat, and he's been in diplomacy and as the Minister of Foreign Affairs since 2004, but he's also a damn liar. I
Yeah,
mean, you can't trust anything he says. So he's the main guy at the table across from Secretary Rubio. And that to me is extremely concerning because truthfully, Jim, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but I've seen, having spent 12 years of my career in Europe at different negotiations for a variety of different things, from what was going on in the Balkans to what was going on in Romania and Moldova. You see American I'll call them American diplomats, not so much the ambassadors because they have a feel, but you would have a congressional delegation, a Codel come over, and they would have on the happy face and slapping people on the back and thinking
yep,
it's a political entity. That's not how you negotiate. And when you're talking about putting Secretary Rubio and Michael Waltz, the NSA, up against Lavrov in a room that doesn't have the Europeans or the Ukrainians, it's not going to end well, truthfully.
yeah.
And it appears not to have based on the after action press reports that occurred this morning.
Yeah, and the French President Emmanuel Macron apparently put out a statement earlier today saying, essentially, that Europe needs to start thinking about its own security in a different way, that it has to think about it in a way that doesn't really rely as much on the United States of America anymore. And that's a scary prospect. And I wonder, General, can you talk about that a little bit? Because, I mean, the concerning part is, and you and I have covered this and talked about this so many times, the courageous and valiant way that the Ukrainians have defended their country, to think that the United States could have a hand in any way whatsoever in undermining that in the next couple of years, to me, I just think it not only invites a human tragedy, which may very well take place, but it just will forever stain the legacy of this country from a foreign policy standpoint. If we have any role in that kind of undermining of the Ukrainians and what they've been trying to do.
Well, right, and
Yeah,
what I'd go back a little bit more too, Jim, and
yeah,
say not only what happened at the negotiating table this morning, but what happened in Mons, what happened at the Munich Security Conference, what happened in
yeah,
Stuttgart and the NATO headquarters with Secretary Hegseth,
yeah,
and
sure,
with the Munich Security Conference, which I've attended multiple times during my career, and know who's accepted and who's not. And
yeah,
the only person that I've ever seen during my time at the MSC that was not accepted and was almost heartily booed as much as the vice president was once again Lavrov when he
yeah,
spoke there and basically told a bunch of lies to an entire audience that knew he was lying. So you've got, going back to your question about what does this do for Europe? We have an 80-year history of really taking good partnerships and good alliances and building upon them.
yeah,
And as I said at a conference at West Point last week, you don't deploy trust You build trust by being there. You can't just put forces in a region. And I'm very concerned, knowing the intricacies of the NATO Article 5 and Article 4 processes, of there seems to be indicators that even those won't be followed by the United States based on transactional relationships. So
Yes.
all of these things together really concern me. Going to your point about what the Ukrainians have delivered, as you know, I because I sent it to you, the Bulwark piece that just came out this morning. What I tried to do in that piece, first of all, was talk about the inequality of the negotiations between Secretary Rubio and Minister Lavrov. But what I also tried to portray, that over 3 years, the Ukrainians have been masterful in countering every single Russian move. Now, they haven't won the fight, that's for sure. And there are some people that will say they're caught up in a stalemate. But this is a country that has a connection between their military, their government, and their people. And that's what Clausewitz calls the Great Triangle. When those three things are in balance, then you can do international relations really well, and you can conduct warfare in a good manner. So
Yeah.
this balance occurs, and you've got the people supporting the military, the president Zelensky supporting the people and the military, and you've got now an insertion by the United States that seems to be disrupting that relationship. And that scares the bejesus out of me.
Yeah. And if it scares the bejesus out of you, it scares the bejesus out of all of us, General.
Yeah.
And you mentioned
Jim,
Secretary
please call me
Hegseth.
Mark. Okay.
Mark,
We,
Mark, I know, I
we,
know.
we had to keep the formality on CNN. We don't have to do that anymore.
Well, my mom smacks me upside the head if I just lose that Virginia gentleman that she tried to instill in me. But it didn't always work. But um, Mark, you mentioned Secretary Hegseth when he goes to Brussels and communicates just right off the bat, without any kind of negotiations or anything, that Ukraine probably should not count on full membership in NATO. And all of the other things that he said, when you had the vice president, J.D. Vance, going to the Munich Security Conference and lecturing the Europeans about free speech and saying, why are you not letting this ultra right wing party into your politics in Germany and so on? It just seems like they just want to be bulls in a china shop without any kind of strategic considerations whatsoever. And that means they're going to have to own the consequences, because if Russia decides to go into one of the Baltic states, if it decides after settling things over Ukraine that they want to poke and prod and see where else they can find vulnerabilities, that's on Donald Trump. That's on his watch, and it's a result of his policies.
Yeah, well, it's not just the policies too, Jim. What I would say, it's the messaging campaign. The whole thing before the election and right after the election was shock and awe. And I tried to knock that down in another piece I wrote, saying, hey, shock and awe didn't work so well for the military. Yeah,
That's
there
right.
was the initial shock and awe when bombs were going off in Baghdad, but for the next 12 years, we were fixing all the things to help the citizens of Iraq get back to normal. What you're seeing is the same kind of shock and awe, the chainsaw approach, where you're not thinking about the second and third order effects. So it's great for Secretary Hegseth to go into Stuttgart, the headquarters of U.S. European Command and the dual-hatted location for General Cavelli, and talk about DEI. But man, dude, you're on the world stage now. You've got to do other things than this craziness, and you've got to think about the repercussions of the kinds of things you say. The same thing with Vice President Vance at the Munich Security Conference. The same thing with Secretary Rubio in a meeting in Saudi Arabia. You not only have the original messaging, you actually have to do something afterwards to really follow up on some type of plan. And what we're seeing in many areas, not just international relations, but here in the United States, is there's a lot of proclamations, and then people who are proclaiming things are finding out, ooh, stuff isn't going so well. We've fired a bunch of people that run our nuclear weapons and our nuclear devices, and we're firing the FAA folks who run our airplanes. That's not a good look.
Yeah, yeah. Life is not a Fox News set. I mean, and I think that that's what they're trying to do, is just, go out there and spew these talking points without any regard for what comes next. And speaking of that, Mark, I also wanted to talk to you about Gaza, because you and I haven't spoken for several weeks. You had the president of the United States saying that he wants to turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. He was talking about he still talks about the U.S. taking over Gaza, although he's ruling out the possibility, or it sounds like he's ruling out the possibility of putting U.S. boots on the ground. You and I both know he's probably never going to do that. But again, the messaging creates chaos, and it begs the question, what is going on here? I don't remember having a conversation during the campaign about the United States taking over Gaza. And as you were talking about with Iraq earlier, these kinds of missions of occupation don't end well.
Yeah. The Gaza, when you start doing just back of the napkin analysis, Jim,
Yeah.
Gaza is, and I've been outside of Gaza in Israel with the Israeli Gazan division commander, and he's talked about the issue. Gaza, the location itself, the geography of it, it's 6 times larger than Manhattan in New York. And it has 170,000 structures that have been destroyed, and there's rubble all over it. So
Yeah.
when you're talking about a reconstruction effort, this ain't one building that you're trying to renovate. This isn't House Hunters. This is, I mean, this is a place that's pretty big, and it's going to cost a lot of money. And as we've seen in the last couple of days, when hostages have been released by Hamas, Hamas ain't dead yet.
Yeah.
They're still pretty prevalent in the area. So when you're talking about putting my sisters and brothers that are wearing the uniform in that kind of an area to allegedly reconstruct or turn it into a Mediterranean, you also have a Mar-a-Lago in the Mediterranean. You also have to have security forces, and you're
Right.
also going to be fighting terrorists, because this is a bad neighborhood, and there's a lot more that goes into it. Again, I go back to, it's great to do these proclamations, but has anyone thought about the implications and the planning that's connected with all of this?
Yeah, and Mark, because of your history with your counterparts, military counterparts with other countries, strong U.S. allies, and so on, I can only imagine what some of them are saying right now when you hear the president of the United States talking about taking over Greenland, taking over the Panama Canal, wanting to make Canada the 51st state. I mean, all of it just sounds so ridiculous. I was talking to some of the folks in the diplomatic community here in Washington over the last couple of weeks, and they were basically laughing at all of this. It reminded me of when Trump was in front of the UN, and people were starting to laugh at him at the UN. It, you know, the word of the president of the United States has to mean something, or
Yeah.
else we're in big trouble.
Yeah, it does, and there's. I had a chance to go to the War College when I was a colonel, Jim, and after a years long look at strategy, I had an instructor at the end that said there are 4 things you have to remember about this year-long course regarding international relations and strategy. Number one is always take the high ground, and what he meant by that was not the Civil War high ground; it was the moral, the physical, the emotional high ground. Number two was words are important, so you better be precise when you give directions. Number three, personalities matter. When you're dealing with different people, you have to understand their motivations. And the fourth piece was logistics are important. They determine
Yes.
the art of the possible. All of these things are being ignored right now by a lot of people in the administration, going back to the comment we had about earlier, just to get to the messaging to sound tough and be great and be the hard guy and be the alpha male.
Yeah.
International relationships and good alliances depend on a lot more than being the tough guy.
Yeah, and just to let the viewers know who are tuning in, and we appreciate all the comments and everything. Mark is writing about this on Substack. Mark's writing about this in the Atlantic, and one of the other things I know you've been paying attention to is what's been going on over at the Pentagon and these pronouncements about coming from Pete Hegseth about women serving in the military and so on. Can you talk a little bit about the culture over at the Pentagon and why? uh, our military, does derive a good deal of strength from all of the walks of life that come into the Pentagon. People go after terms like DEI and diversity and that sort of thing. I don't. I think that those are important terms, but there, another way to look at it is it's all of us coming together in this wonderful military, this wonderful, armed services that we have.
Yeah, Jim, it's interesting because My last job in the Army was commanding U.S. forces in Europe. My second to last job in the Army, which nobody knows about, was for 2 years, I was commanding basic training across the United States. And
Wow.
what I saw every year, we were bringing in about 160,000 soldiers every year into the Army, taking them from
Yep.
civilians to soldiers. And what I saw is they were coming from every one of our states, every
Yep.
one of our territories, and there were also quite a few immigrants who weren't even citizens that wanted to
That's
join
right.
up and serve. So when you take the individuals, the key requirement of a professional military is to take the individual and help them build teams. In order to build teams, you have to understand the men and women next to you. You have to really know the cultural differences that, and you have to have an intellectual curiosity about what makes Jim Acosta, Jim Acosta. What's his background? What's his character like? So that when we're out somewhere fighting together, you can rely on that individual. And I got to tell you, I've said multiple times, and I've been slandered for this. I'm the wokest guy you ever want to meet, because I got to tell you, after 40 years
Yeah.
in the military, I loved every one of the soldiers, even the ones that committed some bad things. I loved them all because they were there to raise their hand and to serve something bigger than themselves, and they all came together. The
Yeah.
young woman from Mississippi and the young man from Bronx, New York, were on the same team together. Doesn't matter their colors, but in order to get there, they gotta learn about each other.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we seem to have a bunch of people who don't understand that.
That's a really good, important point. And I've covered military over the years and gone to various bases and talked about issues like multiple deployments that we saw during the war on terror and the war in Iraq and so on. And if anybody wants to see the real America, go to a military base of the United States of America. You will find all walks of life. You will find people who came from broken homes, from homes led by single mothers. You'll find interracial marriages. You'll find husbands and wives living together on these military bases, trying to make ends meet, not making a lot of money. I mean, you name it. As you said, folks who have been part of the immigrant experience of this country. Perhaps they're documented, but mom is not documented. I mean, you name it. And it just, I think it's a beautiful thing about our military. And it when they go off and serve overseas, it's a reminder of this amazing thing that they're fighting for, that they're defending.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
a guy that once wrote a book, a guy named Andrew Basevich, who wrote a book called Diplomat in Khaki. And what
Yeah.
he talked about was all of the soldiers who were wearing khaki overseas at the time were really the true diplomats and the representation for the American way of life. Having
Yeah.
spent a lot of time in Germany, the Germans remember a couple things. They remember the candy bomber from the Berlin airlift, the guy that would not only deliver equipment to Berlin, the free Berlin when the Russians were there, but when he
Yeah.
was coming back to Wiesbaden, he would throw Hershey bars out the window to the kids near the airfield.
Yeah.
They know about those kind of legends. And I got to tell you one more story, Jim. I was at West Point 2 weeks ago when the DEI requirement came out from the Pentagon about getting rid of clubs, and you couldn't have, the Black Engineer Club or the Hispanic American Club. And
Yeah.
what really bothered me about that was I had just spent a couple of days with some of the best and the brightest young people from all walks of life, from all political persuasions. They were the smartest. I came out of there fired up. And the
Yeah.
last day I was there, I see, someone who knows nothing about the military academy saying, "Hey, get rid of all the DEI stuff because we don't want that kind of thing as part of our history."
Yeah.
Hell, I mean, the one of my classmates from West Point is Lloyd Austin, the former Secretary
Mm.
of Defense. When he came in 1971, when we first entered, there weren't a whole lot of other black cadets there. So he
Wow.
was not a DEI hire at West Point. He was a guy that made the grade and actually came through and had a great career as a four-star general and then as a
Yeah.
Secretary of Defense. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about.
And Mark, what you said there is just, I think it's a great way to end the discussion. And you and I in the past have talked about, maybe I could have you come on from time to time as my military analyst in my go-to. I hope I can do that. I would love to be able to do that because I have a feeling we're talking so much about what's happening with the federal workforce and things that are happening domestically right now. I get this feeling that the world stage is going to be a huge, huge story here in the coming days, whether it's Ukraine, Gaza, you name it.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Jim. And I'd also
Yeah,
say it's going to be a little bit sporty on the world
yeah,
stage as we
yeah,
use that expression
absolutely.
without hyperbole in the military. It's going to get sporty, and we got to have some good people stepping forward and saying, here's what America stands for. Here are our values. Here's what we believe in, and they should be driving our policies, but right now they're not.
Yeah. There are some who say might makes right, and in many ways, right makes might. And I'm not coming up with that myself. Others have used that expression in the past, but it very much is about what the American experience is all about. It's very much about what the United States of America is all about. And Mark, you're a shining example of that as well. I'm going to call you General Hertling one last time. General Hertling, thank you very much for coming on the Jim Acosta Show. Hope we can do this
Well,
again, over and
I
over and
hope
over.
so too. Thank you, Mr. Acosta. It's a pleasure being with you.
Nobody calls me that. Nobody calls my dad that either. So you got to go back several generations to find a Mr. Acosta. But thanks, Mark. Good to talk to you.
You got it, Jim. Thank you.
All right, take care. And General Hertling, you just hit the nail on the head. It is what makes America special, and it goes back to the conversation I was having with Molly and Rick earlier, and that is the American way of life. And I know I sound like a broken record. I talked about this last week. I'm going to talk about it again this week. I'm going to keep talking about it. you know that is something worth defending. That is something worth preserving and protecting. And you can hear Duke off, and then you can hear right on cue let out a little bark there. And all of that is precious and valuable, and it is something that we need to talk about and keep the conversation going about here in the coming days. But thank you, all of you, for joining me on this program. My thanks again to Molly John Fast, Rick Wilson, and General Mark Hertling. Even though he doesn't want me to call him General, I'll call him that while he's not on the program. Thanks everybody for watching. Still reporting from Washington, I'm Jim Acosta. Have a great evening, everybody. Good to talk to you. Bye bye.